There are two kinds of quiet daughters in every house: the ones whose silence means obedience, and the ones whose silence means memory. Most parents never learn the difference, not until one morning when a folder slides across a kitchen table and the daughter finally looks up. And in that single moment, the mother realizes she raised the wrong kind of quiet girl. My name is Madison. I turned 18 on April 15th, 2026, tax day in America, the day everyone pays what they owe, and the day my family would finally pay for their crimes. Have you ever felt like an invisible outsider in your own home, where the people called family only look at you as a utility to exploit? Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who is part of our community today. The clock on my nightstand read 11:51 p.m. Outside my bedroom window in Vail, Colorado, a brutal mountain blizzard clawed at the glass, casting jagged, icy shadows across my small pine desk. The room smelled faintly of old wood and absolute isolation. Then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother, Stephanie, sent 9 minutes too early. It read, "Stepfather Jason and I have finalized the accounts for the new family wealth holdings company. Tomorrow morning, we will protect you from your own impulsiveness." I didn't cry, I didn't panic, or text her back asking why. I rubbed my eyes trying to summon regret, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a family dynamic anymore, it was a balance sheet, and my mother had just overdrafted my compassion. They thought my compliance was a currency they could spend indefinitely. For months, I had been the silent investor in their version of family, watching them whisper in the kitchen and swap out the identities of the shady financial planners visiting our house. They mistook my defensive silence for obedience, assuming a 17-year-old girl would simply sit back and let them absorb her future. But anger wasn't loud this time, it was clinical. I opened my laptop and loaded the encrypted legal portal that my late great-grandfather Charles's trusted advisor Robert had secured for me weeks ago. I sat in the dark, watching the cursor blink in the signature box as the seconds ticked down. 11:59 p.m., my hands were steady on the keys. At exactly 12 o'clock midnight, on the very first second of my 18th birthday, I executed my full digital signature. One careful letter at a time, I signed away their leverage. With that single irreversible act, I officially activated and funded the Margaret Trust. By 12:04 a.m., the confirmation screen glowed against the dark room, casting a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. Exactly $1,365,000 of independent inheritance was moved entirely out of their legal reach, locked into an unassailable corporate custody structure forever. No family borrowing, no temporary help, no emotional blackmail disguised as sacrifice. I closed my laptop, crawled back under my blankets, and for the first time in my life, I slept in absolute safety. The cage they had spent 4 months building for me was now completely empty, and they were still sleeping downstairs, dreaming of money that no longer belonged to them. To understand why I had to act with such cold precision, you have to look past the stone fireplace and the heated driveways of our house in Vail. You have to see the rot underneath. For years, I had been an unpaid employee in my own life. My stepfather, Jason, ran a luxury logistics and transport firm that looked pristine from the outside, but underneath, it was drowning in millions of dollars of toxic, high-interest debt. My mother, Stephanie, didn't see a daughter when she looked at me. She saw a safety net. She used my part-time earnings and the very memory of my late father as a bottomless cash cushion to keep their fragile upper-class fantasy from collapsing. But the financial exploitation ran deeper than just pocketing my paychecks. The true kill shot to any lingering string of familial loyalty came when I uncovered the paperwork regarding my biological father's life insurance. Years ago, he had left a massive $900,000 life insurance policy, explicitly designated to secure my future and my education. Stephanie and Jason hadn't just mismanaged it. They had quietly hijacked it. They transferred the documents while I was still a grieving child, completely wiping the account clean to bankroll a fleet of commercial diesel trucks for Jason and to fund my stepsister Kayla's elite private tutoring and apartment in New York. I was left counting pennies while Kayla boasted about an unlimited budget. Most people watching my story would ask why I didn't scream, why I didn't pack a bag at 15 and run. What outsiders fail to realize is the psychological architecture of a toxic home. This was the trap of learned helplessness, a set of invisible shackles designed to make you believe that any resistance is entirely futile. In our house, emotions were currency and feelings were weaponized. If I cried, I was dramatic. If I fought back, I was ungrateful. When an isolated child is starved of validation for long enough, her psychological baseline adapts to a permanent holding pattern. You learn to freeze. You learn that survival looks exactly like submission. But my mother made a fatal mistake in her narcissistic arrogance. She truly believed that because I stopped speaking, I had stopped thinking. She thought my silence meant blindness, but it actually meant memory. I wasn't cowering under her psychological cage anymore. I was systematically collecting evidence. My compliance wasn't a surrender, it was a tactical delay. I stayed completely still, keeping my face blank and my routines identical, allowing them to believe they had successfully groomed their perfect submissive cash cow. Every casual cruelty, every hidden transaction, and every stolen dollar was being meticulously logged into a database. I was just a quiet girl counting down the days, waiting for the exact moment the law would finally grant me the power to strike back. Morning arrived at precisely 7:45 a.m. The kitchen was thick with the rich, heavy smell of sweet pancakes and the warm, golden glow of birthday candles flickering on a pristine ceramic plate. It was a perfectly staged masterpiece of domestic warmth, a calculated performance designed to mask the cold cruelty waiting just beneath the surface. My mother, Stephanie, rushed over the moment I stepped into the room, throwing her arms around me in a suffocating, overly dramatic embrace. She whispered a theatrical happy birthday into my ear, her tight, manicured fingers gripping my shoulders with a desperation she tried hard to hide. My stepfather, Jason, sat at the head of the table, his eyes tracking my every movement, while my stepsister, Kayla, scrolled mindlessly on her phone, completely uninterested in anything that didn't directly benefit her. I sat down calmly, taking a slow sip of orange juice as the silver syrup tray caught the dim light. The hallway outside smelled heavily of stale coffee and unspoken malice. After I took exactly 2 bites, Stephanie folded her hands neatly on the table, her face morphing into a mask of practiced, patient concern. She leaned in closer and murmured that now that I was finally 18, we needed to sign the initial paperwork for my future before the notary public arrived at 10. Smoothly, almost mechanically, she slid a heavy manila folder across the table. The bold letters on the front read, Family Asset Management Unification Agreement. Every single page smelled like an intricate, multi-layered betrayal. They thought I would look at the gold pen she placed in my hand and sign without a second thought. Instead, I turned the pages slowly, my eyes tracking every predatory clause they had spent 4 months drafting in secret. I watched the confidence slowly drain from Stephanie's face, replaced first by irritation and then by a creeping, tight panic. 5 full minutes of absolute silence passed. Jason finally snapped, slamming his heavy hand down onto the hardwood table, causing the crystal juice glasses to rattle violently. He sneered that I didn't need to audit every single line and ordered me to just put my name on the dotted line. I looked up calmly, my voice flat, as I asked my mother to explain the exact purpose of the newly registered shell company listed deep in the clauses. Her perfect, upper-class smile twitched violently at the edges. Jason cut in aggressively, threatening that if I wanted to play games, they would cut off all residential support, seize my vehicle, and lock me out of the family legacy entirely. Stephanie chimed in with her soft, weaponized, wounded voice, gaslighting me by whispering that I was behaving erratically, that I was emotionally unstable, and that my sudden refusal to cooperate was a pathologically selfish act. And she insisted this cage was for my own protection, desperate to force me into handing over control of the $1,365,000 inheritance before her arrogance completely dissolved. I slowly set the gold fountain pen down on top of the unread pages. I didn't shake and I didn't raise my voice. The emotional manipulation rolling off my mother was heavy, but it didn't register as a threat anymore. It felt like an outdated sales pitch from a bankrupt company. I looked directly at Jason, matching his aggressive posture with an absolute chilling stillness. I told him I wouldn't be signing the documents. Before he could unleash the screaming fit building behind his bloodshot eyes, I pulled my phone from my pocket and placed it squarely in the center of the mahogany table, right on top of the family financial unification agreement. It was exactly 9:03 a.m. Right on cue, the screen lit up and the phone began to vibrate against the wood. The caller identification read, "Robert." My mother froze, her eyes darting from the screen to my face as a sharp line of static filled the kitchen. I pressed the speakerphone button. Robert's voice entered the room, cold, measured, and entirely detached from our domestic theater. He didn't offer a polite morning greeting. He simply stated his full name and professional title as the managing executor of my late great-grandfather Charles's estate assets. Jason half stood from his chair, his face darkening as he demanded to know who was interrupting a private family meeting. Robert didn't even pause. With absolute legal precision, he advised Jason to maintain careful language, noting that the call was being recorded for federal asset protection records. The sheer weight of authority in Robert's voice forced Jason back into his seat in stunned silence. Robert then directed his focus entirely to my mother. He informed her that the document she had just slid across the table was completely invalid and legally dead. He explicitly stated that because the agreement had been drafted and engineered over a 4-month period while I was still legally a minor, it constituted a severe violation of parental fiduciary expectations and transparent coercion. Stephanie's face went entirely hollow, the manicured illusion of maternal care evaporating in real time, but Robert wasn't finished. He dryly announced that at exactly 12:04 a.m., that morning, the entirety of my $1,365,000 inheritance had been successfully migrated into the Margaret Trust. The structure was officially funded, active, and fully irrevocable under a neutral corporate custody bank. No asset could be legally transferred, reassigned, or borrowed by an outside party ever again. My mother dropped her silver fork onto her plate, the sharp clang echoing through a kitchen that now smelled entirely of panic. They had spent months building a legal cage, only to discover the bars had turned to dust before breakfast. The silence in the kitchen wasn't just heavy, it was suffocating. The hallway smelled like burnt toast and absolute panic. But Robert wasn't finished. His voice cut through the stillness like a scalpel, perfectly calm and completely unyielding. He stated that securing the trust was only the first phase of his mandate from my late great-grandfather Charles. He then introduced the devastating results of a secret 2-month forensic audit his firm had conducted into our family's entire financial timeline. I watched my mother, Stephanie, grip the edge of the granite counter, her manicured nails digging into the stone as Robert laid out the data tracking the life insurance policy left by my biological father. He didn't use soft language or hide behind euphemisms. He flatly stated that they had uncovered undeniable documentary evidence of systematic asset theft. He detailed how they collaborated with an attorney named Jeffrey to forge my signature on the release documents, illegally siphoning the full $900,000 from my custodial account. When I was 12, Jason had told me that my father had left behind nothing but debts and a broken truck. I had believed him, carrying that manufactured shame around like a lead weight. Now, the absolute truth hung in the air, cold, factual, and lethal. This wasn't a case of parental mismanagement or an aggressive investment strategy. It was a criminal calculation carried out by the people who were supposed to protect me. Jason's overbearing demeanor instantly evaporated, his face collapsing into a hollow gray mask as the transactional terms of his crime echoed through the room. My stepsister Kayla began sobbing hysterically into her hands, her unearned entitlement completely shattering as she realized her private New York tuition and expensive lifestyle had been funded by a criminal paper trail. This wasn't a domestic squabble about family dynamics or childhood favoritism anymore. This was a kill shot. Robert's voice ground on, delivering the final legal blows with clinical precision. He announced that a federal judge had signed a sealed seizure warrant days ago based on the forensic audit and evidence of forgery we secretly submitted. He dryly informed Jason that the order was timed to activate at exactly 9 o'clock this morning, meaning their logistics, transport accounts, and corporate shell entities were already frozen. My mother looked at me, her eyes wide with a combination of terror and desperation, silently begging me to intervene, to act like the compliant, submissive girl she thought she had raised. Her weaponized tears failed to work. I sat there with cold, absolute clarity, watching the facade of their upper-class authority shatter into pieces next to the cold pancakes. They weren't parents anymore. They were documented white-collar criminals facing major prison time, completely stripped of any moral ground to stand on, and their redemption was entirely off the table. Robert paused on the speakerphone, asking me if I could confirm that the document currently sitting on the table matched the fraudulent unification paperwork they had attempted to force me to sign. I looked down at the heavy manila folder, 12 pages of absolute greed. I told him yes, it was the exact same file. 2 weeks after that explosive breakfast, the house of cards didn't just collapse, it dissolved into public humiliation. With their commercial transport accounts frozen for the federal fraud investigation, Jason's high-end logistics empire fell into an immediate default chain. The banks repossessed his fleet of heavy trucks, and a bright federal asset seizure notice was permanently slapped onto the front gate of our luxury Vail estate. By then, I had already severed the cord. I packed my grandfather's pine box, loaded my books, and moved down to Denver, living under the safe legal protection and genuine quiet of my Aunt Beth's home. It was a cold, rainy afternoon when the past came knocking on our door. I looked through the peephole to see my mother, Stephanie, standing on the porch. The elite, carefully curated upper-class facade she had worn like armor for years was entirely gone. Her hair was damp from the storm, her expensive designer coat looked wrinkled, and her eyes were bloodshot and swollen from crying. When Aunt Beth opened the door, Stephanie didn't command or judge. She just stood there, completely diminished, staring at the welcome mat. This was the exact moment I witnessed the illusion of power from an empty wallet. What people fail to understand about narcissistic abusers is that their systemic dominance is almost always an external prop, a loud authority rented with borrowed money and stolen leverage. They command rooms and enforce submission only because their accounts are full and their lifestyle looks untouchable. But the absolute second the financial supply is choked off by the law, the towering abuser shrinks into a hollow, cowering panic. Jason's loud intimidation had dissolved into nothingness, and Stephanie was left holding a wallet full of maxed-out credit cards and a social reputation turned to ash. Their power hadn't been an internal strength, it was just a transactional mask that vanished the moment the money died. She threw herself toward me, her voice cracked and frantic as she begged me to call Robert and withdraw the forensic audit records. She wept weaponized tears, crying that they were facing absolute bankruptcy, that Jason was facing immediate prison time, and that they were being evicted from the community. Then she tried her final, desperate manipulation tactic, whispering that I was destroying my stepsister Kayla's life and throwing her future away over a childhood misunderstanding. Aunt Beth stepped forward, her solid frame instantly shielding me from the toxic desperation. But I didn't need protection anymore. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a copy of the unsealed federal indictment that the U.S. Attorney's Office had just handed down. I placed the heavy papers directly into my mother's trembling, damp hands. I looked her in the eyes, feeling no anger, no panic, and absolutely no regret. This wasn't a breakdown. It was just a balance sheet. I told her that she didn't commit signature forgery for Kayla. She did it because she mistakenly believed my silence meant I was ignorant. I told her goodbye and quietly closed the heavy oak door, locking out her manipulation for the rest of my life. Jason's luxury logistics empire crumbled completely under the weight of the federal investigation. He was forced to move into a cramped, run-down attic room above a noisy industrial garage. Jeffrey, the crooked family lawyer who had willfully enabled their predatory schemes, was swiftly disbarred by the state bar, ending his career in absolute disgrace. Kayla had to forfeit her spot at her elite university, registering at a local public college while working 2 minimum wage jobs just to afford basic living expenses. With the unyielding support of Aunt Beth, I calmly stepped into my university lectures to study environmental engineering, my $1,365,000 inheritance, completely untouched and secured. For the first time in my life, the constant background hum of anxiety disappeared, and I learned that silence could feel like a peaceful sanctuary instead of a defensive shield. What the world continuously fails to understand about systemic family manipulation is that vulnerable children are often forced to disguise their survival under the mask of obedience. We live in a society that pathologically demands that children offer infinite, unconditional grace to parents who treat them as a financial utility or an emotional doormat. People use biological connections like a blank check to justify years of invisible exploitation, emotional neglect, or outright theft under the guise of parenting. But a cold, brutal truth you must accept to save your own life is that blood does not guarantee character, and a mother's name is not an automatic shield against predatory greed. When you are a quiet child in a toxic home, your silence is never weakness. It is a meticulous process of recording data. You are not cowering. You are collecting the undeniable proof of how they trample your boundaries when they think you are too small to fight back. Deciding to walk away from people who actively plot to steal your future while smiling over breakfast and handing you pancakes is not selfish. It is the highest form of self-respect and sanity. You do not owe your loyalty to a biological cage. True revenge is never loud, explosive, or driven by screaming matches. The ultimate revenge is the cold, flawless execution of legal and psychological boundaries that renders your abusers completely worthless in your life, while you quietly build a beautiful, independent existence in a place their manipulation can never reach again. Let them keep their empty drama, their ruined paperwork, and their weaponized tears. Your autonomy and your peace belong entirely to you. If Madison's precise legal victory against family manipulation moved you today, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel right now. Share this video with someone who needs the courage to set hard boundaries and protect their own life. And tell me in the comments below, what would you have done the moment that folder slid across the kitchen table?